cam videos and 2 body camera videos. They were on, I suppose, Blaine, but we don't know whether they show us anything useful. Have you had a chance to get some sense of what other evidence there is in this case?
I have, and they do. They do show us another vantage point of what happened. So I was just scrubbing through one of the videos, watching one of the videos from one of the officers. And what's interesting about it, Allie, is really the interactions were pretty calm for the first 25 minutes or so of the video. You see the officers standing outside. Mr. Brooks is seated in his car. The officer standing outside kind of questioning, asking him things like, what is he doing there? What's his night been like? How many drinks has he had? Going back and forth like that. And relatively calm demeanor for the better part of 20-25 minutes. It's about 28 minutes or so into that body camera video that Mr. Brooks begins a sobriety test, a field sobriety test, where you do the things like, can you count, can you walk, those types of things. That goes on for a few minutes. And then a few minutes later, 43 minutes in, is where an officer says, you know what, I think that you've had too much to drink to be driving, and starts to place him under arrest. And that is when the video escalates about 43 minutes in. And so you kind of see that's when you see the kind of struggle begin. And then that's where it kind of goes into that eyewitness video that you've seen that you've seen previously of the tussling on the ground. So it certainly gives us a walk up to exactly what happened. And again, like I said, very interesting. It was very calm until that moment of arrest, until that happened. One thing that I do want to report too, and I don't know if we have the photos, but we've also obtained from Atlanta Police Department the pictures and more information and the names of the 2 officers who have been fired. So we've got 2 of their photographs, and we've also learned that they've been on the force, one of them just a couple of years. One of the officers was hired in 2018, the other hired in 2013. So one officer placed on administrative leave. He was the one who was hired in 2018. The other who was terminated was hired in 2013. So again, learning a little bit more information, and again, really just underscoring the Atlanta Police putting out more information about this throughout the night, Allie.
So the video that we are seeing now, which follows from the video that you were seeing of the tussle on the ground, we now know to be more than 40 minutes into the interaction between the police and Mr. Brooks. Jim, let me ask you this. It's a point that was brought up by Roland Martin earlier tonight. It was brought up by Jelani Cobb earlier. It was brought up by Mark Claxton. And that is, after having seen George Floyd's video or whatever other videos that you've watched in the last few years, there is a fear among some black men about what happens when they go into police custody. So there is an added element here when we're talking about de-escalation of the fact that the act of arresting a black man for a nonviolent crime has people worried. There may be some instinct there to run, to get away, to say, I mean, I heard people telling me tonight and today, and I've heard this from others who exist in positions of prominence in society, to say that nothing feels like the feeling of about to be arrested if you're a black man, and the worry about what that means. How do we figure out how the police can have empathy for that perspective that says, this guy wants to get away because he actually fears for his life?
Well, I don't even think you should be the first 2 weeks of the police academy ought to be history. You ought to know the history of America. We could go up to a police officer for the most part and say, well, do you know who Vernon Dahmer is? Do you know who Emmett Till is? They don't know. They don't know who those people are who sacrificed their lives in the civil rights era. Do you know who, Reverend Shuttlesworth was in Birmingham, where they bombed his church over and over, the Klan? They don't know the history. They can't understand. Now, you can't be that person, and you can't be that person's race, maybe, but you have to understand the history so you can deal with the people you have to deal with in the community. So I think in the beginning, the police forces need to do that. They need to take the people to the civil rights museums around the country. They're in Alabama, they're in Memphis, they're in Washington. They need to understand this before you enter into police service. Secondly, the states need to change some of the laws so officers can make these decisions. Here sheriff's office and here's officers that did speak to Mr. Brooks for 45 minutes, but then when they went to arrest him, which they probably couldn't have let him go because he was operating a motor vehicle and he was inebriated, and they had to, and he didn't want to go. But everything was done right until they drew the gun and shot him. So prior to that, I didn't see anything wrong.
Jim, thank you for your help tonight. The news will continue here on MSNBC. Richard Louis picks it up from here.
Early morning, 1 a.m. Eastern. For those of you just joining us, we're covering the breaking news coming out of Atlanta, a new flashpoint in the debate over police violence. Now, this is what we know right now. The police officer involved in the shooting death of 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks has been fired as of this hour. We learned that within the last 60 minutes. Another officer also has been put on administrative leave. A fire broke out tonight in the Wendy's parking lot where police shot and killed Mr. Brooks. And hours ago, Atlanta's police chief resigned. Earlier, the attorney for the family, Rayshard Brooks, spoke about his death at the hands of police.
You can't say you don't have other options. Where was he going to go? He was barely jogging away. You could have boxed him in. Support came in, I think, 2 minutes. He would have been boxed in and trapped. Why did you have to kill him?
All right, now, earlier this evening, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms announced that Chief Erica Shields had resigned. Take a listen.
Chief Erica Shields has been a solid member of APD for over 2 decades and has a deep and abiding love for the people of Atlanta. And because of her desire that Atlanta be a model of what meaningful reform should look like across this country, Chief Shields has offered to immediately step aside as police chief so that the city may move forward with urgency in rebuilding the trust so desperately needed throughout our communities.
Now, all of this comes after this incident involving Rayshard Brooks. Officers responding to that Wendy's after Brooks supposedly fell asleep in the drive-through line. Now, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation says the 27-year-old man failed a field sobriety test. When officers tried to arrest him, he apparently resisted, grabbed one of their tasers, and tried to run off, as has been seen in this video of one of the bystanders. GBI saying he might have been trying to fire the taser when an officer shot at him. Brooks died at the hospital. Former Chief Shields had been with Atlanta PD for more than 2 decades. Her resignation statement reads, in part, quote, "Out of a deep and abiding love for this city and this department, I offered to step aside as police chief." She added, quote, "It is time for the city to move forward and build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve," unquote. All right, joined now by phone by MSNBC correspondent Blaine Alexander. Blaine, it is 1 o'clock a.m. local time, and at this hour, what are we learning about this case?
So we're learning that there are 6 different angles, camera angles at least, Richard, that show different vantage points of what happened. So we're talking about the surveillance video from the Wendy's parking lot, the eyewitness video, and then body camera and dash camera video from each of the officers. So that's 2 sets each, so 4 sets. So that's 6 different vantage points to see what's going on, and they tell us a lot. I'm going through right now and looking at the body camera video that was just released within the last hour or so by the Atlanta Police Department. And, it's remarkable, a couple of things notable as I look at the body camera video. One, that it's a pretty calm interaction for the better part of about 40 minutes or so. It wasn't until about 43 minutes into that video that an officer tells Mr. Brooks, "Hey, I think you've had too much to drink to be driving. We're going to put you under arrest." They move to put him under arrest, and that's when he starts to struggle. That's when the kind of tussling starts between the two. You hear the officers say, "Stop fighting, you're going to get tased." So it's not until 43 minutes into that interaction that things escalate, and then when they do, of course, it really escalates, and it's less than a minute from that moment or so to when those shots are fired, about a minute and a half. So the other thing that we're learning. Again, one officer has been fired. The officer who fired those shots has been terminated. The second officer has been put on administrative leave. And we're learning more about those officers. We're learning that both of them are relatively new to the force. One was hired in 2013. The other hired just in 2018. So just about 2 years or so on the APD before this incident happened. So the other thing that we're watching on all of this, and I think what's remarkable, is that all of this is happening very quickly. It was less than 24 hours that we saw the chief resign, the officer fired, and an APD putting out body camera video and dash camera video and the names of these officers. So certainly appears to be a move to try and get as much information out as possible. The other thing that I'll say about the videos that you see them in the body camera video, rather, there's a point at which they search him, that they search his person before putting him under arrest as well, Richard.
So, Blaine, what is new this hour for those who might be turning in at a very late evening hour, if you are still counting it as the day before, is that we are now reviewing video about 90 minutes. Is that right, Blaine? That is new to us, and we are reviewing it right now at NBC News and MSNBC before we show it. You have been able to view it. And Blaine, from what you have seen so far, what might be new and more instructive about what happened based on the video we've seen before from the bystander as well as from the surveillance video?
I think the most notable thing is the time period. I think the most notable thing is the time period that video that we've seen from the bystander that shows the tussle is about 43 minutes or so into the interaction between Mr. Brooks and the two police officers. We see him taking his field sobriety test. You know that according to the GBI, he failed that field sobriety test. That's why they put him under arrest. It's really what's most instructive about the body camera video, at least this first angle, is what leads up to that encounter. Now, once the struggle between the officers and Mr. Brooks starts happening, the body camera it jostled around. It does, you might expect, in the middle of a struggle, of a kind of fight on the ground. You really can't see much. What's valuable there is the audio, and you hear the officer say several times, stop fighting, you're going to get tased. And then they run after him. You hear what sounds like a taser sound, and you hear what sound to be at least 3 gunshots, and then some kind of yelling and scuffling afterwards. So that's kind of the most value of it there. But during that actual interaction, you can't see much because it's involved in the tussle. Yeah.
And again, for our viewers, we are evaluating that video right now. There's a lot of it. Before we show it to, of course, we want to make sure that we can verify as well as review what is acceptable for broadcast. Blaine, back to you on this. Is there a sense of which officer, as we're looking at some of the video on screen right now, is it the officer in the front, or is it the officer in the interior, in the back?
I'm not able to see the video that you're able to see, but I will say that it was the officer who has been terminated was the one who fired the shots, and so that's kind of where that's going. Now, I will say this: the Fulton County District Attorney has also weighed in on this. So, in addition to the multiple angles, there are multiple investigations going on as well. So, the GBI is investigating, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The Fulton DA's office is conducting its own investigation. He said that he's conducting his own investigation to decide, whether or not charges may be appropriate in this case. So he's doing an independent investigation. And then the attorney for Mr. Brooks' family, Chris Stewart, and his law partner are conducting a third investigation. So there are at least 3 different investigations going on, trying to lead up to figuring out exactly what happened and whether there will be charges forthcoming in this case.
Again, Blaine Alexander there in Atlanta, Georgia for us, our correspondent reporting tonight. Blaine, we were just showing a picture of the officer that was fired this evening, and you did give us some description of his background. Do we have any more information about the officer that was terminated?
We do. So we do know that he was hired on the force in 2013. Yes, we know that he was hired on the force in 2013. Atlanta Police Department is identifying him, and I want to make sure that I have this name correct.
Sure, absolutely. I know this is ongoing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Atlanta Police Department is identifying him as Officer Garrett Wolf, hired in October of 2013. That's the officer who has been terminated according to the Atlanta Police Department. Now, the officer who has been put on administrative leave, or administrative duty was the one that was hired in September of 2018. So that's what we know about the two Atlanta police officers at this time. Now, it's notable that the mayor earlier this evening, when she spoke and when she talked about the fact that she had accepted the resignation of Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields, she said immediately at the time that she did not believe that this use of force was justified and that she was calling for the officer to be terminated. She wanted the officer to be terminated as well. That came from the mayor, and several hours later, we know that he has in fact been fired from the force.
So, Blaine, in the context of what we're living in today within the last month, is that this has moved pretty quickly, as has been said so far. Is there any understanding, any reporting locally there in Atlanta, Georgia, about how and why Erica Shields, as well as the mayor, moved so quickly? What might be the reasons behind it? Because it did come out within the last 12 hours as this is just what is going to happen. We did get a lot of, if you will, backstory behind the reasoning. Of course, it could be that which they have already stated. Brooks and the killing of Rayshard Brooks. As we move straight to on-the-ground reporting coming from Blaine Alexander. Blaine, I want to get straight back to you because as we look at some of the live pictures here locally, 1:24 a.m., a very early Sunday morning, but a late Saturday. And this is after the very location of where Rayshard was killed. The Wendy's has gone up in flames on this evening. But what we're watching at this hour, the breaking news that we are in rolling coverage for, is that we're reviewing right now at MSNBC and NBC News some new video, 90 minutes of roughly, more or less, of body cam video. You've been able to review some of it. And I think the one thing as we look over it is that it started as a very calm interaction between Rayshard Brooks as well as with law enforcement.
It started calm and remained calm until the moment that it suddenly escalated. And that was about 43 minutes into this video, Richard. And that was, and it was a sharp escalation. So what we saw was officers arrive, in kind of conversation between Mr. Brooks, who was sitting in his car, officers standing outside, asking questions like, how much have you had to drink? What was your night like? How did you get here? What are you doing here? Things like that. And about 28 or so minutes in, they take him, he gets out of the car, he begins a field sobriety test. And again, 43 minutes in is when the officer says, hey, you know what, I think you've had too much to be driving, and moves to put him under arrest. It was then, from that moment, less than 2 minutes between that moment and when we heard gunshots, in that point in the clip. So certainly escalated very, very quickly. The other thing is that, again, officers searched him during that time and did not find a weapon on him. So it's also a notable piece of that video.
Very notable, as we've been reporting on. Blaine, also part of this, with if folks are just joining us at this hour, is that we've had some movement in terms of the very officers that were involved in the video that you see on the left-hand side of your screen now on your main screen, Blaine. And we have a termination as well as administrative.
Yeah, one officer has been fired. The officer who fired those shots has been fired from the force. And I believe that we have a photo of him.
We do.
The Atlanta Police Department provided us with this photo and the officer's name. That officer that's been terminated is Officer Garrett Wolf.
On the left on our screen right now.
There on the screen. Okay, Garrett Wolf. He was hired back in 2013. And there is another officer who's been placed on administrative duty. And he was hired in 2018. So that's obviously the officer that did not fire the shots in that incident. So, but there are 3 different investigations taking place right now, Richard. I think that's important to point out. The GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, come in and taken over that shooting, as is customary with any officer-involved shootings here in Georgia. They oversee those investigations. So they're working on that. The Fulton County District Attorney's Office also doing an investigation of their own. So in addition to getting whatever findings come from the GBI, the DA's office is doing their own investigation, their own combing, and the DA has spoken out and said they're working to determine if charges are appropriate in this case. And then finally, the attorneys for the Brooks family, they are doing their own investigation. They spoke out this evening in very strong terms and essentially said, underscored the point that Mr. Brooks wasn't doing anything violent or doing anything to bother anybody. You know, the 911 call originated because he was asleep in his car, and that car was blocking the drive-through at the Wendy's lane, and so that's why officers responded there. So all of these, you know, things kind of going into consideration to determine whether or not there will be charges in the case.
Again, our correspondent Blaine Alexander live in Atlanta for us via phone at this hour. You'll see in this moment when officers attempted to handcuff Rayshard Brooks, which you were indicating earlier, Blaine, that's about 40 minutes into their interaction with him. And then that scuffle ensues that you've been describing to us, Blaine. The body camera falling to the ground, maybe about this moment here. And then at the end of the video, you're going to hear what appears to be gunshots. We want to warn you, the video is disturbing. Here we go. All right, Blaine, we're able to show some of the video there that you've been able to review so far, and we'll play a little bit again on the left-hand side. That's what you were describing, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we were describing. So that was, again, about 43 minutes into that video.
Blaine, are you still Blaine Alexander?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Richard? I'm still here. That video that we saw was about 43 minutes into the video from the vantage point of one of the body cameras of one of the officers there. The other point that I'll make is that GBI Director Vic Reynolds says that what appeared to happen is that Mr. Brooks appeared to turn around and point the taser at the officers. That's what he said during that news conference there. And you see, again, what appears to be that in that video, in the surveillance video as well. So, you know, I really think that video is notable, though, because it does give us context, again, into the timing, and it also shows, not in this particular clip, but elsewhere in the clip, it shows that, you know, the officers did search him and discovered that he was not armed.
Blaine Alexander, thank you so much for your reporting tonight on this very topic. Again, the new video coming into us here at MSNBC and NBC News. Mark Claxton still with us, Jim Kavanaugh still with us. To the control room, if we can play that video one more time. And then I do want to get Mark as well as Jim's response to what we were just able to show new here on MSNBC. Let's play that video if we can.
I think you've had too much to drink to be driving. Put your hands behind your back a little bit. Put your hands behind your back. Hey, stop it. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. You're going to get tired. You're going to get tired.
So much excitement.
Mark, what did you hear there?
What I heard there is exactly what Jim Kavanaugh several minutes ago predicted we would hear, and that is routine, what should be a very routine kind of police stop or an attempt to handcuff an individual. You know, the mild resistance initially, followed by some more direct resistance. And the question still remains, the question that the attorney posed early on, that Jim has posed, that I'm posing, and that is, why did you shoot this man? Why did you kill this man? Because nothing that we have seen as of yet, and I don't see how anything can change this, or any additional video can change this. The most informative video is that which we've seen from Wendy's parking lot, which shows the chasing and the firing of the gunshots. But nothing's going to change that, and it's still as offensive, and there's still as many questions as to why. Why'd you kill this man? And
it's just out of line, it's out of order. But the video is exactly as Jim had predicted it would be, and it's a situation, a scenario that police officers have on a regular basis. Nothing unusual. No need for this escalated level of force, deadly physical force. There's nothing there that would justify the use of deadly physical force.
Jim, what did you learn from watching this? Mark is agreeing with what you said earlier. What's going through the mind of an officer right now in that situation, whatever might be typical here?
Well, it was a routine interaction first. It took them 43 minutes talking with Mr. Brooks, as Blaine described, and then they decided to make the arrest because he was inebriated and had been operating a motor vehicle and couldn't be allowed to continue. And what happens often is, and Mark's done it, I've done it, and every officer has, when you start to arrest people sometimes, and I can remember some of the worst fights I had was when I got one hand cuffed, and it just seems to be that the person decides at that point that they want to resist, and that's what Mr. Brooks did. But none of this justifies killing him. I mean, he resisted, but people resist. That's the way the world is, and they can be taken into custody safely. And the officers, everything they did there that we watched was okay until they shot him when he was running away. Now, one thing I agree totally with Mark. The most important video is the video from the Wendy's, the high side video from Wendy's. And what I've seen in watching that so many times is I do believe that Mr. Brooks does deploy the taser right when he turns around behind the red car, because you can actually see the flash when he deploys the taser. And what the officer does, if you watch it closely, he's running at first with the taser in his right hand. You'll first see that on the dash cam video. The officer has his taser in his right hand. He's chasing Mr. Brooks, who has the other taser. And then when they get down near the red car, the officer switches the taser to his left hand, and he reaches for his duty weapon with his right hand. And then he drops the taser by the back of the red car, and when he's shooting Mr. Brooks. So Mr. Brooks, I believe, does turn and shoot the taser. Still, it's no reason to use deadly force. You know what a taser does. You know how far away it is. It's unlikely he's going to incapacitate you. You can see him turn. You'll see the flash on his taser. And then the officer, just before that, has changed hands with his taser from his right hand to his left. And then with his right hand, he draws his duty weapon, drops the taser, and shoots Mr. Brooks. So it's just a horrible, horrible situation. This young man should not be dead. He might have got away, got a block away, and could have been apprehended. He should not be dead, and it's just wrong. I think the Atlanta mayor took swift action to fire him. The district attorney and GBI got to look at this stuff quickly. Too much delay in justice in all these cases. Just too much delay when proof is in front of your face. They need to take action on these cases. I do not think that second officer did anything wrong if he didn't fire his weapon, unless there's some other thing that might have been done, but we can't see it. And he's on administrative duty, so he's not responsible for the shots fired by the other officer. And what we saw previously, Richard, in the videos, we didn't see that other officer or either one of them doing anything wrong until they shot, until the one officer shot Mr. Brooks.
Yeah, Jim, for those who are joining us, Garrett Wolf was fired. The officer that did, we believe, shoot and kill, at least based on the reporting right now. Again, this is alleged because this is still going to go through investigation, as well as more details potentially coming out. The killing of, again, Rayshard Brooks. And so for Mark, on your side here, Garrett Wolf, who was fired. We have the second officer who's on administrative leave. We have Erica Shields, who has resigned. When you look at what you have called a dangerous instrument potentially being aimed by Rayshard Brooks at the officer, is there anything that would justified? Jim saying no. You've also said no in the past. Is there anything procedurally that might give a gray space in terms of what we saw in this video so many times over? Also getting the body cam video just in that we showed moments ago.
No, it's no gray space here. I mean, the use of force continuum, if it applies here, and it should be applied, is clear. And the use of deadly physical force is not justified in this particular case. And especially, Richard, when you consider that some police departments, and I don't know if Atlanta does this, during the course of their training, they actually deploy the tasers on the trainees, just so they would have understanding about the impact and effects of the tasers themselves. Like I said, I'm not that familiar with Atlanta's training procedure, but there are some jurisdictions that's part of the actual training, is to be tased by your colleagues. So quite clearly, the taser is not a deadly instrument. It's a dangerous instrument, but not a deadly weapon, which is a distinction that we often use in New York at the very least. So there's no gray area here. It's pretty clear, straightforward. As Jim has indicated, it really shouldn't take that much effort and energy in these quote-unquote investigations to come to some sort of swift conclusion, at least a direction for the prosecution of this incident.
Jim, you were mentioning earlier here the dropping of the taser at the back of the red car, and then the removal of the gun from the holster. What typically is, in training, the justification for doing that?
Well, the choice to use deadly force. If somebody just firing a gun at you, you don't want to be holding a taser. You're going to be throwing that thing down as fast as you can. That's going to be like a hot skillet in my hand, a taser, if somebody's firing a firearm at me. So the officer, first he switches hands, and then he drops the taser and draws his weapon. I think one of the big points, though, that's going to play here is if the officer, when the taser, when Mr. Brooks turned and fired the taser, it goes off like a report. The officer knew Mr. Brooks didn't have a gun. They just searched him. They searched him. They frisked him. He did not have a gun, and they knew he had a taser. So I don't see how he's going to be able to not know that was a taser and shot him. Why would he do this? I mean, we can say, we can guess there's racial animus, or we don't know, or is he mad because he was in a fight? Was he punched? Or was he just too excited? What was the reason? There is no reason to kill a man in a situation like this. It's a shame. This is a young man. He's 27 years old. I mean, it's just really, really a shame. He made a bad choice, maybe, to fight with the officers, but not a choice that gives his life. It's just a choice of an arrest. And he should have been allowed to run across that parking lot and, get arrested in the morning. It just is a sad, sad way to police in America. We just got to stop it.
A catastrophe by all standards. Rolling coverage here on MSNBC. We have new video that came into us. NBC News reviewing it, and now we want to show you some of that new video. It's basically new body camera footage obtained by NBC News. And what you see, I just want to replay it again in case you're just joining us. It is the moment when the officers that you've seen in the video just moments ago, when they attempted to handcuff Rayshard Brooks about 40 minutes into their interaction with him. A scuffle ensuing in this video, the body camera falling to the ground at the end of what we'll show you. And at the end of the video as well, you can hear what appear to be gunshots. We want to warn you again that the video is disturbing. Take a listen.
I think you've had too much to drink to be driving. Put your hands behind your back, boy. Put your hands behind your back. Hey, stop fighting. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. You're gonna get tased. You're gonna get tased. Stop. What's the wrong? Stop. Stop. You're gonna get tased. It's the right. Hands off the taser. Hands off the taser. Stop fighting. Hands off the taser.
Jim Kavanaugh still with us, Mark Claxton. Mark, stop fighting, and then very soon after, what appear again to be 3 shots. In that sequence of events, what stands out to you?
It's just the more I see it, the more routine that it appears to be. I mean, from a police standpoint, there is nothing significant or unusual in that interaction, and nothing that a police officer shouldn't be prepared for or expecting. I mean, it's just so bland and so routine that it makes it that much more egregious what happens afterwards. Those are commands that you give. They're normal, they're routine commands, but you have the full understanding that not everyone can instantaneously abide by the commands. And I think too often police fail to realize that they are trained to handle certain situations. They are trained to perform under high stress and make clear-headed decisions. That's their training. Oftentimes, civilians react kind of emotionally, especially if they're under the effects of some substance, perhaps. And those are all things that you have to take into account as a police officer when you're approaching or interacting with people. Because you receive that first class training and how to manage stress, how to react in the most stressful of times, how to face the danger that's there. The civilian doesn't have that same training. There should be no expectation on your part as a professional that they do. So understand, they react instinctively. Sometimes they react unwisely, but you have to rely heavily on your training to make sure that you remain safe and they remain safe and you can get the job done.
A really good point for us civilians, Mark, that you make. And over to you, Jim, on this. For civilians, you look at that environment, it does appear very high stress. But for those who go through the academy, for those who are trained, for those who have years, and again, we're watching some live pictures out of Atlanta, Georgia, 2:23 local time. A little bit earlier, about an hour ago, we were watching what appeared to be tear gas on the ground, people rubbing their eyes as well as grabbing their faces. Common reaction, unfortunately, that we've seen lately across the country in every single town, it appears, in America. But Jim, that academy experience, those years of training, the years of experience, how does that work in terms of handling high stress situations, as Mark was describing, that we have been playing for our viewers throughout this evening? How does it help them?
Well, they should be able to handle a fight with a person resisting arrest that does not involve, a weapon. And it's a completely different scenario when you're an officer who is alone fighting with someone, or there's 2 of you. We used to say, and Mark will remember this in training, in every fight you're in, there's you and at least one other person, and there's a gun. It may be just the policeman's gun, but there's always a gun there. So it's you, another guy, and a gun. So you can't let him get your gun in a fight. And if you're alone in a fight, things can get really bad really fast.
Well, Jim, based on what,
and
I'm sorry to interrupt here, Jim, but based on what you heard from the body cam video that we were able to play,